Someone had wiped a piece to her family out of existence, and Deborah couldn't shake the feeling that whoever did it wasn't finished yet. The park bench felt colder than usual that brisk autumn morning, but it was the hollow feeling in Deborah Vance's chest that truly chilled her. Yesterday, that spot held the plaque dedicated to her great-grandmother, a founder. Now, only fresh gouges in the stone remained. A thick, black X was spray-painted over the ghostly outline. This wasn't theft, this was an active effacement. A shiver ran down her spine, not from the cold, but from the unsettling silence where a story used to be. She squinted at the empty pedestal, a knot tightening in her stomach. Someone wasn't just erasing history, they were targeting it. Even from a distance, Deborah sensed fear disguised as inconvenience, people avoiding her eyes, their silence saying more than rumors ever could. The markers weren't just decorative, they were the very threads of Pine Ridge's fabric, tying generations together with quiet dignity. She remembered reading to children beside the plaque about the old grist mill, watching their eyes light up with wonder. Now, that connection felt broken. Deborah felt a deep, personal responsibility for these markers. Her decades surrounded by books had taught her that every piece of recorded history, no matter how small, held immense value. She'd helped catalog some of these very markers years ago, ensuring their inscriptions were accurate. Losing them felt like losing a piece of herself, a piece of everyone in Pine Ridge. A quiet determination began to simmer within her. Someone had to find out what happened. Her first stop wasn't the police, not yet. Deborah walked over to Mr. Henderson, the park's longest-serving groundskeeper, a man whose hands knew every root and stone. He was sweeping fallen leaves with slow, methodical strokes, his face a map of the town's worries. "Good morning, Arthur," she began, her voice gentle. "Have you seen anything unusual near the markers lately?" He paused, resting his broom against a towering oak, a troubled look crossing his face. Arthur sighed, his gaze drifting over the empty spaces. "Contractors," he grunted, pointing his broom at a freshly dug trench. They were digging near the founder's cairn all week. Big trucks, clipboards, and that we-know-better attitude. I saw one of them loading a wooden crate into a van, smelled like fresh paint and solvent. But one of them came back after dark. I saw the truck's lights from my window. That wasn't on the schedule. Looked more like they were cleaning up a mess than preserving anything. Deborah thanked him, her mind already racing. Contractors? That sounded less like theft and more like something bureaucratic. The mystery was just beginning to unfurl its first layers. Deborah's heart thumped as she pushed open the heavy doors of Town Hall, a building she knew too well from endless library committee meetings. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and lukewarm coffee, a familiar but oppressive mix. At the front desk, Martha, the town clerk, was buried under a towering stack of files. "Martha, I need to know about any work permits issued for the community park recently," Deborah said, keeping her voice calm but firm. Startled, Martha pushed her glasses higher on her nose, her fingers fumbling through the papers. "Permits? Oh, Deborah, you know how things get around here. Departments everywhere." She mumbled something about a new digital archiving system causing confusion. Deborah's librarian instincts flared, misfiled, misplaced, overlooked. Martha finally produced a single permit, vaguely labeled General Site Improvements, dated last month. It answered nothing, but hinted at everything. Next, Deborah sought Councilman Davies, known for his big ideas about town development. He listened politely, then launched into a passionate speech about revitalizing Pine Ridge, including plans for a new interactive digital history display. The markers were a bit static, wouldn't you say? He said, smiling widely. "If we don't remove the remaining markers by next week, they'll be permanently decommissioned, non-negotiable." Control, Deborah. It's all about control. Deborah felt a jolt of panic. 7 days. Less than a week to act. As she left, she overheard 2 municipal workers near the fountain discussing a forgotten maintenance project. "They never finished that pipe repair," one said, "but they sure moved a lot of stuff out of the way for it." Her ears pricked. Forgotten maintenance. Things moved. Could the missing markers be linked to something as mundane yet easily overlooked as a municipal repair job? Back at the park, Deborah approached the old fountain. Freshly turned earth caught her attention where another marker had once stood. A faint metallic scent mixed with damp soil. Kneeling, she studied the ground with careful precision. This was her kind of puzzle, one requiring patience, like piecing together fragments of a forgotten diary. A small, faded orange flag peeked from the soil at the fountain's edge, half buried under autumn leaves. It looked like a marker used by utility crews. A fragment of paper, stuck to the flag, fluttered in the breeze. It was a faded section of a work order, temporarily relocate park elements for subsurface utility access. The handwriting was messy, almost illegible. Deborah carefully detached the fragment, her mind racing. This wasn't vandalism, it was authorized work. But authorized by whom? She walked back through the quiet park. Autumn leaves crunched under her sensible shoes, each step a thoughtful rhythm. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that made the empty marker spots seem even more stark. She imagined the words that had been there, the faces of historical figures, the dates that marked foundational moments. The very air felt different without those stories grounding the space. Determined to find answers, she headed straight for Mr. Jenkins's office. Tucked away in a dusty corner of his filing cabinet, she found the original work order. It confirmed the temporary relocation but added a crucial detail, a small, almost invisible sketch of a historical marker, with an arrow pointing vaguely towards the municipal storage yard. A jolt went through her. Relocation, not removal. It dawned on her that Pine Ridge had recently updated its zoning ordinances regarding temporary structures. Someone, trying to be overly compliant, had overreacted. But where exactly in the yard? The crude sketch reminded her of the park's first dedicated groundskeeper, Mr. Abernathy, who had documented every installation by hand. He'd retired years ago, but his meticulous nature was legendary. Perhaps his personal records contained the original site maps referenced in this sketch. Deborah picked up the phone and called his daughter. Perhaps the true guardian of the park's history was its most forgotten. It's often true that the most important connections aren't found in grand gestures or official pronouncements, but in quiet, unassuming acts of care. A phone call to an old friend, a shared memory, a small act of kindness, those are the threads that truly weave a community together. Deborah knew this in her bones, it was the quiet wisdom of a life carefully observed. Mr. Abernathy's daughter remembered a stack of his funny old maps stored in their attic and invited Deborah over. Amid dusty boxes, Deborah found a crude, hand-drawn map of the park, nearly 30 years old. In Mr. Abernathy's distinctive script, a note read, "Historical markers temporarily housed in old public works shed, south lot, during pipe repairs." She gasped softly. The south lot. Not the main yard. With renewed purpose, Deborah drove to the south lot of the Public Works Department, a forgotten corner usually reserved for obsolete equipment. Tall weeds grew around a small, ramshackle shed, its paint peeling. A faded sign above the rusty door read, "Temporary storage, do not disturb." The hairs on her arms stood on end. It all added up, piece by miscommunicated piece. The door was unlocked. Inside, a thick layer of dust covered everything. And there they were, leaning against the far wall, covered by old tarpaulins, the beloved historical markers. Not stolen, not vandalized, but quietly forgotten amid administrative shifts. They lay dormant, waiting for someone to remember them. Relief washed over Deborah, nearly bringing tears. The markers were scratched, a little dirty, but otherwise intact. It wasn't malice or conspiracy, just a chain of well-intentioned actions, each link losing context, a forgotten work order, an unread note, a new manager unaware of old plans. The simplest explanation had been the hardest to find. Deborah ran her hand over the cold bronze of a familiar plaque, feeling the raised letters telling the story of Pine Ridge's founding. The emotional peak hit her like a warm wave. It wasn't just finding the markers, it was realizing how easily a town's history could vanish, not through malice, but through neglect. She looked at the plaque for her great-grandmother, its bronze surface untouched, a testament to endurance. Her next task was clear: she had to use the councilman's own deadline against him. Gather everyone with a stake in the park: Councilman Davies, the clerk Martha, groundskeeper Arthur, and committee members. It was time for a town meeting, not of debates, but of immediate, shared action. They had less than a week before the remaining markers were cleared. Getting the markers back to their rightful places required more than just a truck. It demanded mending the gaps in communication that had sparked the entire ordeal. Deborah organized a gathering at Town Hall, not a formal meeting, but an open discussion. Calmly, she laid out the timeline: the general site improvements permit, the updated zoning ordinances, the forgotten maintenance project, and the misfiled records. Around the table, faces shifted, defensiveness softened into understanding, and understanding bloomed into shared recognition of how small oversights had grown into confusion. Councilman Davies, initially crestfallen, proposed a community effort to clean and reinstall the markers. Martha pledged to digitize all future park records with explicit instructions for historical items. Mr. Jenkins volunteered his crew to help with the heavy lifting. Gradually, collective ownership replaced individual agendas. The day the markers returned was a celebration. Children wiped dust from plaques under the careful guidance of adults, and one by one, the markers were restored to their pedestals. A small dedication ceremony honored Deborah's quiet persistence. A new marker, placed at the park entrance, proclaimed the shared stories of Pine Ridge, a tribute not only to history, but to the community that safeguarded it. Deborah watched as sunlight danced across polished bronze, the park alive again with laughter, chatter, and renewed connection. It wasn't merely the marker's physical return, it was the rediscovery of Pine Ridge's capacity to overcome obstacles, not through blame, but through listening and understanding. The stories were home, and so was their collective spirit. What began as a quiet investigation by a retired librarian had unearthed forgotten history and meticulously rewoven the fragile fabric of community relations. The markers now stood taller, not just monuments of the past, but beacons of a future built on open communication, shared effort, and mutual respect. In the end, Pine Ridge understood something deeper than any inscription: history endures not because it is carved in metal or set in stone, but because someone chooses to carry it forward. And on that day, as neighbors worked side by side and the markers rose again from the dust, the town rediscovered the quiet power of a community that refuses to forget itself.